and Trembling by Soren Kierkegaard. Problema 3. The ethical is the universal, as the universal is in turn the disclosed. The single individual qualified as immediate, sensate, and psychical is the hidden. Thus, his ethical task is to work himself out of its hiddenness and to become disclosed in the universal. Every time he desires to remain in the hidden, he trespasses and is immersed in spiritual trial from which he can emerge only by disclosing himself. Once again, we stand at the same point. If there is no hiddenness rooted in the fact that the single individual as the single individual is higher than the universal, then Abraham's conduct cannot be defended, for he disregarded the intermediary ethical agent. The Hegelian philosophy assumes no justified hiddenness, no justified incommensurability. Is then consistent, for it is to demand disclosure, but it is a little bemuddled when it wants to regard Abraham as the father of faith, and so to speak about faith.
Recognition and hiddenness are also an essential element of modern drama. I assume that everyone who merely hears the word hiddenness will easily be able to shake a dozen novels and comedies out of his sleeve. If someone playing the hiding game hides nonsense, we get comedy. But if he is related to the idea, he may come close to being a tragic hero. Consider Iphigenia in Ulysses by Euripides. Agamemnon is about to sacrifice Iphigenia. Aesthetics demands the silence of Agamemnon, inasmuch as it would be unworthy of the hero to seek comfort from another person. Just as out of solitude for the woman, he ought to hide from them as long as possible. On the other hand, in order to be a hero, the hero also has to be tried in the dreadful spiritual trial that the tears of Clytemnestra and Iphigenia will cause. What does aesthetics do? It has a way out. It has the old servant in readiness to disclose everything to Clytemnestra. Now everything is in order, but ethics has no coincidence and no old servant at its disposal. The aesthetic idea contradicts itself as soon as it is to be implemented in actuality. For this reason, ethics is man's disclosure. The tragic hero demonstrates his ethical courage in that he himself, not prey to any aesthetic illusion, announces Iphigenia's fate to her. If he does that, then the tragic hero is Ethic's beloved son, in whom it is well pleased. Blessing was not only one of the most comprehensive minds German has had. He not only displayed an extremely rare precision in his knowledge, which enables one to rely on him and his autopsies without fear of being taken in by loose, undocumented quotations, half-understood phrases picked up in unreliable compendiums, or of being disoriented by a stupid trumpeting of something new that the ancients had presented far better. But Lessing also had a most uncommon gift of explaining what he himself had understood. With that he stopped. In our day, people go further and explain more than they themselves have understood. The conclusions of passions are the only dependable ones, that is, the only convincing ones. Fortunately, existence is here more affectionate and loyal than the wise assert it is, for it excludes no human being, not even the lowest. It fools no one, for in the world of spirit only he is fooled who fools himself. It is everyone's opinion, and if I may be permitted to make a judgment about it, it is also my opinion that to enter a monastery is not the highest. But by no means do I therefore believe that everyone in our day, when one enters the monastery, is greater than the deep and earnest souls who found rest in a monastery. How many in our times has the passion to think this and then to judge themselves honestly? The very idea about being conscientious about time in this way, of taking the time to scrutinize in sleepless vigilance every single secret thought, so that if a person does not always make the movement by virtue of the noblest and holiest in him, he may, in anxiety and horror, discover and lure forth, if no in no other way than through anxiety, the dark emotions hiding in every human life, whereas in association with others one so easily forgets, so easily evades this. It's stopped in so many ways, gets the opportunity to begin afresh. This sort alone, conceived with due deference, could I believe chastise many a man in our day who believes he has already attained the highest. Forced fulfills this idea. Anyone who has a notion of what it means for a person to live on spirit also knows what the hunger of doubt means, and knows that the doubter hungers just as much for the daily bread of life as for the nourishment of spirit. So Abraham did not speak. He did not speak to Sarah, to Eliezer, or to Isaac. He bypassed these three ethical authorities, since for Abraham the ethical had no higher expression than family life. Aesthetics allowed, indeed demanded, silence of the single individual. If he knew that by remaining silent he could save another, this alone adequately shows that Abraham is not within the scope of aesthetics. His silence is certainly not in order to save Isaac. In fact, his whole task of sacrificing Isaac for his own and for God's sake is an offense to aesthetics, because it is able to understand that I sacrifice myself, but not that I sacrifice someone else for my own sake. A man rouges his face and wears a periwig. The same man is eager to try his fortune with the fair sex. He is perfectly sure of conquering by the aid of rouge and the periwig, which make him absolutely irresistible. He captures a girl and it is at the acme of happiness. Now comes the gist of the matter. If he is able to admit this embellishment, he does not lose all of his infatuating power. When he reveals himself as a plain ordinary man, and bold at that, he does not thereby lose the loved one. So either there is a paradox that the individual as the individual stands in an absolute relation to the absolute, or Abraham is lost. Epilogue. Once, when the price of spices in Holland fell, the merchants had a few cargoes sunk in the sea in order to jack up the price. Do we need something similar in the world of the spirit? Are we so sure that we have achieved the highest, so that there is nothing left for us to do, except piously to delude ourselves into thinking that we have not come that far, simply in order to have something to occupy one's time? Is this the kind of self-deception the present age needs? Should it be trained in virtuosity along that line, or is it not instead adequately perfected in the art of deceiving itself? Or rather, does it not need an honest earnestness that fearlessly and incorruptibly points to the tasks, an honest earnestness that lovingly maintains the task, that does not disquiet people into wanting to attain the highest too hastily, but keeps the tasks young and beautiful and lovely to look at, inviting to all, and yet also different and inspiring to the noble-minded, for the noble nature is inspired only by the difficult. The essentially human is passion, and once one generation perfectly understands another and understands itself. For example, no generation has learned to love from another. No generation is able to begin at any other point than the beginning. No later generation has a more abridged task than the previous one. And if someone desires to go further and not stop with loving as the previous generation did, this is foolish and idle talk. But the highest passion in a person is faith, and here no generation begins at any other point than where the previous generation did. Each generation begins all over again. The next generation advances no further than the previous one. That is, if that one was faithful to the task and did not leave high and dry.
As long as one generation is concerned only about its task, which is the highest, it cannot become weary, for the task is always adequate for a person's lifetime. When children on vacation have already played all the games before 12 o'clock and impatiently ask, "Can't someone think up a new game?" does this show that these children are more developed and more advanced than the children in the contemporary or previous generation who make the well-known games last all day long? Or does it now instead that the first children lack what I would call the endearing earnestness belonging to play?
One must go further. One must go further. This impulse to go further is an ancient thing in the world. Faith is the highest passion in a man. There are perhaps many in every generation who do not even reach it, but no one gets further.